on a revolution, well, you know.
Ernesto Che Guevara was born in a small Argentine village in 1928. He studied medicine in Buenos Aires and took some time off before graduation to ride down to Peru with a buddy on a motorcycle to volunteer at an honest-to-God leper colony. Of the many things that Guevara learned on this trip, the first was that the greater part of South America, and therefore the world, was in general a terrible place full of pain and death, those fat cat American capitalist pigs were to blame, and the only thing that could save everybody was Karl Marx and communism. Che quickly turned from medic to soldier and joined the revolutions in Guatemala. And FYI, this is where he earned his famous nickname, Che, because he called everybody Che. Apparently it means the same as hey, pal, chum, or buddy. Anyway, returning to our story, Che arrived to fight the power in Guatemala. Unfortunately, the revolution was quashed before he could fire a shot, and he fled to Mexico, where he was introduced to a charming fellow named Fidel Castro, who had the idea to overthrow Cuba's leader, Fulgencio Batista, for the good of the Cuban people. Things got off to a bumpy start, what with Che's experience in medicine, not combat, and having no battle experience whatsoever. But eventually our boy gained his sea legs, if you will, and became the master strategist, soldier, and general badass extraordinaire. He was said to be a strict disciplinarian and would hunt down traitors or deserters and have them killed. This apparently put the pep back in his unit, and soon Cuba was liberated from the tyrannical lead of Batista and under the watchful, loving eyes of Fidel Castro. Castro gave Che all sorts of luxurious titles and positions in post-revolutionary Cuba, like president of the National Bank of Cuba, but Che preferred to travel the world, taking in the sights of tragedies and oppression, and speaking to the people about bloody coups and overthrowing the establishment. He was never one to mince words. When interviewed after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, he reassured newspapers that there was never a time when missiles were in Cuban control, because if there was, he would have fired them off at the United States. His candid speaking was beginning to make Castro nervous, especially when Che went off against the Soviet Union for dehumanizing its people, because at that time the USSR was the major financier of the Cuban Revolution. But Che disappeared from public light, traveling the world to train revolutionaries in the Congo and Bolivia. It was in Bolivia where he was finally captured in 1967 with the aid of, who else, those capitalist American CIA pigs. The Bolivian soldiers were ecstatic to be in the presence of Che, who was an international hero at the time, but unfortunately they were under orders to kill him. But even in his final moments, Che remained completely awesome by telling the hesitant executioner, "Shoot, coward, you're only going to kill a man." After taking pictures with dead Che like he was Burt Reynolds or something, the Bolivian government interred him in a secret burial plot. His remains were found and moved back to Cuba in 1997, where he now rests in a snazzy new tomb in Santa Clara, Cuba. Che's major contributions are a bit fuzzy to pin down. On one hand, his battlefield strategy was at times masterful, allowing a small band of disciplined soldiers to conquer a large number of enemies. On the other hand, his capture in Bolivia was due to poor planning, as he didn't know the lay of the land, carried trashy radios that broke and cut off his supplies, and the Bolivian people he expected to come out in droves to expel the evil dictators wanted nothing to do with the coming fight. Perhaps his greatest contribution to global society is his iconic image, best summed up by Alberto Corda's famous image, Guerrillero Heroico, which translates to heroic guerrilla. No, not that gorilla. This picture, monochromed and stoic, seems to epitomize the revolution en masse, and has inspired the downtrodden to rise up for 30 years. Historians tend to fall into two categories when it comes to Che. One group sees him as a romantic visionary, fighting for the downtrodden, rising up against oppression. In Guatemala, they even got so far as to sanctify the man. Something about a handsome, bearded man that works with lepers and fights for the meek before he's unjustly killed at the hands of his ultimate enemy. But the other category sees him quite differently, a murderous mutineer with his own agenda and a penchant for starting trouble that he never finishes. As for me, I suppose I'm somewhere in between the two fields of thoughts. The man certainly fought for what he believed in, and had a way of encouraging those who had no other option than to fight for the way things ought to be. But it's difficult for me to think that Che would be very happy with the way things have turned out for his fights. Let's tally the scores, shall we? He was stopped before he did anything in Guatemala. He succeeded in bringing Cuba out of dictatorial rule, only to leave things in the capable hands of Fidel Castro. He incited revolt in the Congo, which hasn't exactly been a shining example of peace. And in Bolivia, he couldn't drum up any support, he was ill-prepared, and he was ultimately captured by his worst enemy, who he didn't even know was going to be there. Still, epic failure doesn't exactly make somebody a terrible person in itself, and he does live on today through his iconic image, a symbol of revolution. But from what I've seen, he seems to be less of a flag to be waved whilst burning down the capitalist corporations bleeding this great country like a stuck pig, and more of a trendy patch to be Mod Podge to your ratty canvas backpack as you and your bros discuss indie music down at the local Starbucks. And that's really too bad for Che, but I guess if all else fails, and for him it did, there may be some comfort in knowing that your ideals and everything you've ever stood for can be watered down, castrated, and sold for $10.99 at a Hot Topic.